The desperate signal. Commander Illyra Voss stared through the cracked view screen of what remained of the Arcadian Defense Command, her shoulders heavy with the weight of a civilization on the verge of extinction. The orbital bombardment had stopped momentarily, but the eerie silence felt more threatening than the thunderous impacts that had shaken their underground bunker for the past 17 rotations. "Status report," she ordered, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her insides. Lieutenant Karras, a tall, thin nebulan with luminescent skin that had dimmed considerably during their ordeal, tapped frantically at his console. "Not good, Commander. 3 more habitat domes have gone dark in the eastern quadrant. Voreth dropships are landing in sectors 4 through 9. Casualty reports are..." He swallowed hard. "They're coming in faster than our systems can process them." Illyra nodded grimly, running a hand through her short silver hair. Once a point of pride for the Arcadians, their distinctive metallic hair that shimmered under their triple suns, now matted with dust and blood. "And our planetary defense grid. Down to 14% capacity," Senior Tactician Drell replied, his 4 eyes blinking asynchronously in distress. "Their pulse cannons are specifically calibrated to disrupt our shield harmonics, almost like they knew exactly what frequencies we were using. Because someone sold us out," Illyra hissed, slamming her fist against the tactical display. "When I find which delegate leaked our defense protocols, I'll personally feed them to a Jovari acid worm." The command center fell silent, 20 different officers from 8 allied species all suddenly finding the floor, ceiling, or their consoles intensely interesting. She couldn't blame them. The Arcadian Alliance, once proud peacekeepers of the Orion Arm, reduced to cowering in their last functional command center, while the Voreth Empire methodically erased their civilization from existence. "Communications," Illyra called out, trying to sound authoritative despite it all. "Any responses to our distress call?" Communications Officer Tren, a furry Procyon with large, sensitive ears that now drooped pathetically, shook his head. "Nothing from the Galactic Concordat. The Elian Federation is deeply troubled by recent developments, but apparently not troubled enough to send a single ship. The Tauran Collective claims their battle fleet is undergoing scheduled maintenance." He threw his paws up in exasperation. "All 8,000 vessels simultaneously. What incredible timing." "Everyone's too afraid of the Voreth to help," Illyra murmured, the truth of it burning in her chest. Tactician Drell cleared his throat nervously. "What about, what?" Illyra asked, though she suspected where this was headed. "The humans," Drell said, his voice barely above a whisper. The command center erupted in nervous chittering and clicking sounds, the Arcadian equivalent of uncomfortable laughter. Admiral Zeth, who until now had been silently brooding in the corner, finally spoke. His voice carried the gravelly weight of someone who had seen too many wars across too many star systems. "You want to bring those barbarians into this. Have you forgotten what they did to the Procerian moon colony? They reduced it to rubble because someone insulted their admiral's ancestral home." "That's propaganda," Officer Tren protested weakly. "It was actually because the Procerians were harboring. Their negotiation strategy involves carrying ridiculously oversized weapons to diplomatic meetings," interrupted Counselor Jamar, the Alliance's senior diplomat. Her translucent skin pulsed with agitation. "And they consume actual biological matter for sustenance. They put dead organisms in their mouths and chew them." Illyra closed her eyes, feeling the crushing weight of command. "We sent the signal to every system in range, including Earth. But let's be realistic. No one is coming. Especially not the humans. They haven't responded to any interstellar communications in over 5 solar cycles." As if punctuating her pessimism, another explosion, much closer this time, shook the command center, causing several consoles to spark dramatically. "Well," Illyra sighed, drawing her ceremonial blade, "I always hoped my last stand would be more dignified. But I suppose being obliterated by the universe's most sadistic empire while covered in ceiling debris will have to do. At least the humans aren't here to see us fail." Admiral Zeth muttered. They'd probably just laugh and sell tickets to the show. If only they knew how wrong they were. Counselor Jamar's anxious pacing was driving Alara to the edge of her already frayed sanity. The diplomat adjusted her formal collar for the 12th time in as many minutes, the soft rustling somehow more irritating than the distant explosions. "Would you please stop that infernal pacing?" Admiral Zeth growled, not bothering to look up from the holographic battle maps. "Some of us are trying to calculate exactly how doomed we are." Jamar snorted, her breathing sacs flaring dramatically. "I can tell you precisely how doomed we are without all those fancy calculations. We are, using the technical diplomatic term, completely and utterly annihilated." "Your optimism is overwhelming," Illyra muttered, rubbing her temples. "Remind me why we brought the counselor to our last functional command center." "Because," Jamar replied, drawing herself up to her full unimpressive height, "when the Vorith finally breach these walls, which they will probably within the next 8 hours, someone needs to negotiate our surrender with some semblance of dignity." Lieutenant Karras barked out a laugh that sounded suspiciously like a sob. "Dignity? The Vorith don't accept surrenders. They accept trophies, preferably skulls. Hence my excessive attention to my collar," Jamar replied with a theatrical sigh. "If my skull is destined for some Vorith general's trophy case, I want it to look presentable. First impressions matter, even in death." Communications Officer Tren suddenly jerked upright, his furry ears twitching wildly. "Wait, I'm picking up something on the long-range scanners. Multiple objects entering the system at... That can't be right." "What?" Illyra demanded, hurrying over. "These velocity readings, they're impossible. Nothing moves that fast, not even Vorith warships." Counselor Jamar snorted again, the sound remarkably similar to a deflating pressure valve. "Don't get excited. It's probably just sensor ghosts or perhaps the sweet release of death playing tricks on our desperate minds." "No, it's definitely ships," Tren insisted, his paws dancing across the console. "A lot of ships, and they're broadcasting on..." "Oh no." "What now?" Admiral Zeth demanded. "They're broadcasting on human frequencies." The room fell so silent you could have heard a nanoscale dust mite sneeze. "Humans?" Jamar finally sputtered, her skin turning a sickly shade of yellow. "Impossible. Those psychotic primates never responded to our distress call." "Apparently, they did," Tren replied, adjusting his translator. "And according to these readings, they'll be here in approximately 4 minutes." Jamar collapsed dramatically into the nearest chair, which groaned in protest. "Wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. We escaped death by Vorith, only to be rescued by humans. Have you people heard what they did during the Centauri conflict? Their idea of a peace treaty involved 14 separate clauses about acceptable methods of preparing fermented beverages." "I thought that was just propaganda," Lieutenant Karras whispered. "It wasn't," Jamar hissed. "I was there as a junior attaché. Their admiral insisted that proper fermentation techniques were non-negotiable for civilized discourse. They deliberately poisoned their own neural systems with ethanol compounds for fun. What kind of species does that?" "The kind with the biggest guns in the sector," Admiral Zeth remarked dryly. "And right now, I'd welcome Jovari slime devils if they brought enough firepower." "You don't understand," Jamar moaned, covering her face. "If the humans are coming, it can only mean one thing. They're sending them. Illyra asked, antenna twitching nervously. "The Phantom Fleet," Jamar whispered, as if saying the name too loudly might summon them faster. The command center's main viewscreen flickered to life, just as the proximity alarms began wailing with renewed urgency. The image stabilized to reveal the vast blackness of space, and then, like ghosts materializing from the void itself, they appeared. Ships, human ships. But calling them merely ships was like calling a supernova a light show. "By the 3 moons," Lieutenant Karras whispered, his luminescent skin paling to a sickly dim glow. "Those can't possibly be to scale." But they were. The lead vessel, a behemoth that defied conventional starship architecture, stretched nearly 4 kilometers from bow to stern. Its hull wasn't the sleek, aesthetically pleasing design favored by most civilized species. No, this monstrosity looked like someone had taken several asteroid mining platforms, bolted on excessive weaponry, and then, as an afterthought, added enormous engines that glowed with an ominous blue-white light. The HSS Nemesis, Counselor Jamar murmured, unable to tear her eyes away from the screen. Flagship of the Phantom Fleet. I've seen classified images, but they don't capture the sheer absurdity of it. Behind the Nemesis came at least 30 more vessels, each unique in its grotesque design, but unified in their apparent disregard for conventional space aesthetics or physics. Some were long and angular, bristling with what appeared to be hundreds of weapon ports. Others were bulbous and slow-moving, their hulls scarred with marks that looked suspiciously like the imprints of smaller ships that had collided with them and lost. Are those actual skeletal figures painted on the hull? Elira asked, squinting at one particularly menacing destroyer. Technically, they're stylized calcium structures representing their concept of the Grim Reaper, Jamar corrected automatically. The humans have this bizarre cultural fixation on personifying death as a hooded skeleton. And yes, they painted it on their warships because of course they did. Admiral Zeth leaned forward, his experienced eyes narrowing. Look at their formation. They're not just arriving, they're deploying for battle. As if to confirm his observation, the human fleet began spreading out with surprising grace, forming a three-dimensional pattern that somehow managed to look both chaotic and perfectly coordinated. Incoming transmission. Tren yelped, nearly falling out of his chair. Audio and visual from the Nemesis. Put it on screen, Elira ordered, straightening her uniform in a futile attempt to look presentable. The view screen changed to show a human bridge that looked more like a cross between a cathedral and an industrial accident. In the center stood a human female, her pale skin contrasting sharply with a black uniform adorned with silver insignia. Her hair was pulled back in a tight arrangement, revealing a face that might have been considered attractive by human standards, but was currently set in an expression that made everyone in the command center instinctively want to hide. "This is Admiral Helena Blackwood of Earth's Phantom Fleet," she announced, her voice surprisingly melodious for someone who commanded a ship that could probably crack a planet in half. "We received your distress call. Sorry we're late. We stopped to pick up some friends." The camera panned to show what appeared to be several dozen missiles the size of small buildings, and beyond them, additional ships of distinctly non-human design. "The Vorith, and I have some unfinished business," Admiral Blackwood continued, a smile spreading across her face that contained no warmth whatsoever. "And I believe it's time we settled our accounts." Counselor Jamar fainted dead away, crumpling to the floor with a thud that nobody bothered to acknowledge. Harbingers of retribution. Nobody moved to help Counselor Jamar as she lay sprawled on the floor. They were all too transfixed by the human on screen. This Admiral Helena Blackwood, who somehow managed to look both perfectly composed and like she had just finished dismantling a Star Destroyer with her bare hands. "Well," Admiral Blackwood prompted, one eyebrow raising dangerously high, "is anyone there going to say something, or should I assume this is a prank call and take my fleet elsewhere? I hear the Andromedan cluster is having a nice civil war. Could be entertaining." Commander Elira stumbled forward, nearly tripping over Jamar's prone form. "Admiral Blackwood, the Arcadian Alliance thanks you for your unexpected arrival. I am Commander Elira Voss of the Arcadian Defense Force. What's left of it, anyway?" Blackwood's eyes narrowed, and she leaned closer to her screen. "You look terrible. All of you. How long have the Vorith been bombarding your planet?" 17 standard cycles, Admiral Zeth answered, stepping forward with the dignity of someone who had seen too much to be intimidated even by the commander of the Phantom Fleet. 17 cycles. Blackwood's expression darkened. "And you only sent the distress call 3 days ago." Elira hesitated, embarrassment coloring her silver-toned cheeks. We didn't think anyone would come. Especially not. Especially not us barbaric humans with our primitive ways and terrifying reputation. Blackwood finished for her, a dangerous smile playing at her lips. Yes, we're quite aware of our standing in the galactic community. A male human officer appeared beside her, whispering something in her ear. Blackwood nodded, her expression shifting from amusement to deadly focus in an instant. Commander Voss, I'd love to continue this cultural exchange, but my tactical officer informs me that 15 Vorath dreadnoughts are altering course to intercept us. I assume they've detected our arrival. As if on cue, the command center trembled as orbital bombardment resumed with renewed intensity. They've definitely noticed you. Elara confirmed, glancing at the tactical display where angry red indicators showed Vorath ships converging on the human fleet. Admiral, I don't mean to sound ungrateful, but even your impressive fleet is outnumbered at least 3-1. At this, Admiral Blackwood laughed, a genuine sound of amusement that somehow chilled Elara more than any threat could have. Oh, Commander, I think it's time we had a proper introduction. Those ships you see, that's just Battle Group Alpha. The rest of the Phantom Fleet is right behind us, along with some interested parties who had their own scores to settle with the Vorath. The tactical display suddenly lit up with hundreds, no, thousands, of new signatures emerging from what appeared to be artificial wormholes all around the system's perimeter. By the 3 moons, Lieutenant Karras breathed, his skin glowing brighter in excitement or terror, perhaps both. There must be over 2,000 vessels. 2,417, to be precise, Blackwood corrected, plus the coalition forces from the Proxima Alliance, the Tauran Collective, and yes, even your precious Elian Federation. But the Elians said they couldn't. Officer Tren began. They lied, Blackwood said flatly. They were waiting for someone to take the first step, someone with enough firepower to make the Vorath think twice. That's humanity's role in this galaxy, it seems, the lunatics crazy enough to punch the bully first. Counselor Jamar, who had finally regained consciousness, struggled to her feet. But why? Why would Earth involve itself in our conflict? What could you possibly gain? Something dangerous flashed in Blackwood's eyes. 3 years ago, the Vorath attacked a human colony on Epsilon Eridani I, a scientific outpost, non-military. They claimed it was a navigational error. 8,000 civilians died. A heavy silence fell over the command center. Even Jimar seemed at a loss for words. The Galactic Concordat ruled it an unfortunate incident and imposed economic sanctions that the Vorath ignored. Blackwood continued, her voice cold. We withdrew from interstellar politics after that, not because we were isolationists, but because we were preparing, gathering allies, building ships. You've been planning this for 3 years? Admiral Zeth asked, a newfound respect evident in his voice. Humans are patient when it comes to vengeance, Admiral, Blackwood replied with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Now shall we discuss how we're going to dismantle the Vorath fleet piece by piece, or would you prefer to continue questioning our motives while they reduce your planet to molten slag? Before anyone could respond, the tactical officer beside Blackwood spoke again. Admiral, the Vorath fleet is forming a defensive sphere around their command ship. They're launching fighter squadrons. Perfect, Blackwood nodded. Execute Operation Guillotine. Tell the Taurans to begin their run. The view screen split to show the tactical display of the system. What followed next defied everything the Archadians understood about space warfare. The human fleet, instead of forming a traditional battle line, began to fragment into smaller, seemingly chaotic groups. Some accelerated to impossible speeds, others cut engines entirely, drifting silently. The Allied ships followed suit, creating a 3-dimensional puzzle of movement that made no strategic sense whatsoever. What are they doing? Lieutenant Karras murmured, his brow furrowed in confusion. Admiral Zeth leaned forward, eyes narrowing. They're baiting them. Look at the Vorath formation. Indeed, the disciplined sphere of Voreth ships was beginning to distort as commanders redirected to intercept the scattered human forces, creating small bulges in their otherwise perfect formation. Now, Blackwood ordered calmly, and suddenly every drifting human ship reactivated at once. What had seemed like chaos revealed itself as an intricate dance, each vessel precisely where it needed to be. The Voreth formation, stretched and distorted, now had critical weak points, and the human fleet struck at everyone simultaneously. The view screen flickered with countless weapons discharges as the space around Arcadia exploded into the largest battle the system had ever witnessed. The Arcadians watched in stunned silence as the supposedly superior Voreth fleet found itself outmaneuvered at every turn. Human ships moved with impossible agility, their weapons firing with devastating precision. "They're using the stellar radiation from your sun to mask their targeting systems," Admiral Blackwood explained, noticing their confusion. "The Voreth rely too heavily on automated defense algorithms. We're feeding them false positives while our actual strikes come from completely different vectors." A massive explosion lit up the view screen as one of the Voreth dreadnoughts disintegrated under concentrated fire from what appeared to be a group of smaller human corvettes. "How are those tiny ships generating enough firepower to destroy a dreadnought?" Elira asked, unable to contain her astonishment. "They're not ships, they're missiles," Blackwood replied. "Piloted missiles. Volunteers only, I assure you. The pilots eject before impact." "Most of the time," muttered a grizzled human officer behind Blackwood, just loudly enough to be heard. Counselor Jamar looked physically ill at the concept. "You send your people on suicide runs. We give our people the opportunity to be heroes," Blackwood corrected. "Something your precious Galactic Concordat seemed to forget when they left you to die." The battle continued to unfold with brutal efficiency. Where the Voreth relied on overwhelming force, the humans employed strategies that bordered on the insane. Ships performing maneuvers that should have torn them apart, weapons deployed in ways that defied conventional physics, and tactics that no sane military commander would consider. And it was working. "Admiral," Elira ventured after watching yet another Voreth battleship crumble under human assault, "I've never seen warfare like this. It's barbaric," Blackwood suggested with a knowing smirk. "Beautiful," Elira finished, surprising herself with the admission. The human admiral's expression softened slightly. "War is never beautiful, Commander, but sometimes justice is." Just as it seemed the tide had fully turned, the tactical display showed a new development. The Voreth command ship, an immense vessel nearly twice the size of even the Nemesis, was maneuvering toward Arcadia's largest moon. "What are they doing?" Officer Tren asked, his ears twitching nervously. Admiral Zeth's face darkened. "They're going to use the gravity well to accelerate. They're making a run for it." "No," Blackwood disagreed, her expression grim. "They're positioning for a last strike. Tactical, analyze their trajectory." The human tactical officer worked frantically for a moment before looking up, his face pale. "Admiral, they're on a collision course with the Arcadian capital city. They mean to kamikaze the planet." "What?" Elira gasped. "But that would kill their own ground forces. The Voreth don't retreat, and they don't accept defeat," Jamar whispered. "If they can't have Arcadia, no one will." Admiral Blackwood's voice cut through their horror with calm precision. "Nemesis actual to Reaper Squadron. Target the Voreth command ship. Authorization Omega Protocol." "But Admiral," the tactical officer protested, "they're already entering the moon's gravity well. Even our kinetic strikes can't penetrate their forward shields at that acceleration." "Who said anything about kinetic strikes?" Blackwood replied, a grim smile forming on her lips. "Activate the singularity lance." A visible hush fell over the human bridge. Even through the view screen, the Arcadians could sense the shift in atmosphere. "The what?" Elira asked, but her question was answered as the Nemesis began to change. Massive hull sections shifted, revealing what appeared to be an enormous cannon that extended from the ship's bow, pulsing with energy that distorted the very space around it. "You might want to adjust your visual filters," Blackwood advised. "This gets a bit bright." Before anyone could respond, a beam of what could only be described as concentrated darkness erupted from the nemesis. It didn't look like any weapon discharge the Arcadians had ever seen, less a projectile and more like a tear in reality itself. The beam struck the Vorith command ship just as it emerged from behind the moon, and for a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then, with horrifying elegance, the massive vessel began to implode, collapsing inward as if being crushed by an invisible hand. The process took less than 30 seconds, the enormous dreadnought compressing to a point of brilliant light before vanishing entirely. The command center was deathly silent. What did you do?" Jamar finally managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Created a localized singularity." Blackwood replied matter-of-factly. "Temporary, contained, but quite effective. The technology is still experimental." "Experimental?" Elira echoed faintly. "Well, we've only used it 17 times in combat situations," Blackwood acknowledged with a shrug. "This makes 18. We're still working out some of the power consumption issues." The remaining Vorith vessels, witnessing the fate of their command ship, began to break formation. Some attempted to jump to hyperspace, others surrendered immediately, and a few turned to make desperate last stands. The outcome was never in doubt. Within hours, the battle, if such a one-sided engagement could be called that, was over. The Vorith invasion force was destroyed or captured, their ground troops surrounded and surrendering in droves as human dropships landed with mechanized infantry units that the Arcadians had only heard rumors about. 2 days later, Commander Elira Voss stood beside Admiral Blackwood on the observation deck of the Nemesis, looking down at the battered but recovering planet below. "Your people work quickly," Elira noted, watching as human engineering teams helped restore power to the capital city. "I've never seen a devastated infrastructure rebuilt at this pace." "We've had practice," Blackwood replied simply. "Too much practice." Elira studied the human admiral's profile. "You never answered Counselor Jamar's question properly. Why did you really come? It wasn't just about Epsilon Eridani, was it?" Blackwood was silent for a long moment. "Humanity spent most of its history fighting itself. When we finally reached the stars, we hoped, we'd find better versions of ourselves out there. Instead, we found the same patterns repeating. The strong dominating the weak, bystanders watching atrocities and doing nothing." She turned to face Elira directly. "We decided to be something different. The lunatics crazy enough to punch the bully first," Elira quoted with a slight smile. "Exactly." Blackwood nodded. "The Vorith have been expanding unchecked for too long, while the Galactic Concordat wrung its hands and passed meaningless resolutions. Someone needed to show the galaxy that they could be stopped. And now the real work begins." Blackwood sighed. "Peace is always harder than war, Commander. The Vorith Empire will fragment. Power vacuums will emerge. Old rivalries will reignite. And Earth will be there, in the middle of it all," Elira concluded. "Somebody has to be," Blackwood replied with a wry smile. "Might as well be the barbarians with the big guns." As they watched the sun rise over Arcadia, casting golden light across a world that had nearly been lost, Elira realized that perhaps humanity's reputation for chaos and unpredictability wasn't the disadvantage the galaxy had always assumed. In a universe of rigid thinking and ancient patterns, sometimes what you needed was a species crazy enough to imagine a different way forward, and stubborn enough to make it happen. "I think," Elira said carefully, "that the galaxy might have misjudged humanity." Admiral Blackwood laughed, a genuine sound of amusement. "Oh, Commander Voss, that's where you're wrong. The galaxy judged us perfectly. They just didn't realize that sometimes you need monsters to fight monsters." She extended her hand in the human gesture of partnership. And now shall we discuss the terms of our new alliance? I have a feeling the Arcadian Earth Coalition is going to give the Galactic Concordat quite a lot to think about. Elira took the offered hand, feeling the strength in the human's grip. I believe, Admiral Blackwood, that this is the beginning of a terrifying friendship. The best kind. Blackwood agreed with a smile that promised both protection and peril for any who stood in their way. The very best kind.